Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? If you can hear me, please type in the chat so I know I have an audience. Good. Okay, great. Perfect. Thank you. Well, welcome, everybody. My name is Sarah Weber. I'm the Executive Director of the Association of California Symphony Orchestras. Welcome to AXO's first virtual conference, and welcome to the Editing the Score session. Today, we're really happy to have you with us. Just out of curiosity, anybody attend the session this morning? Let us know in the chat if you were in the session this morning. We'd love to know if we have repeaters here. And also, while you're typing in the chat, I would love to know if where everybody's located. If you want to put your city, state, country in the chat, it would be great to just kind of see where everybody is. I know there's a lot of California, but I think there's a lot of everybody. Carmel, Reno. I'm seeing the chats come in. Oh, that's exciting. Visalia, Long Beach, Las Vegas, Glendale, Stockton, yes. Sunnyvale, oh, Dallas, UK. El Dorado Hills, Santa Monica, more UK, Redlands. This is great. Excellent. Well, I've got a couple announcements before we get going, just the preliminary housekeeping. Any technical difficulties come up, email us conference@acso.org. We are recording today's session. It's going to be available in FeedLoop, our conference platform, tomorrow afternoon, along with slides or any corresponding handouts. If you are viewing this in FeedLoop, as opposed to directly in Zoom, you'll get a survey that will pop up near the end of the session. We'd love to hear your feedback. And also, if you're viewing this through FeedLoop, don't navigate away from this live session. It'll kind of boot you out of the session. So just, if that happens, just jump back in, but just so you know. And we will be having a pretty extended Q&A as part of this session at the end. So you can type your questions in the Q&A function at any time throughout, and we will refer to them when we get to that portion towards the end of the session. I want to remind those of you who were at the session this morning, and let everybody else know who, if you weren't there, that we are running a social media contest during conference. We want to see your workspaces. We want to see all of this, where you're viewing AXO from. So take a picture. It can have you in it. It could just be your workspace, and post it on any social media platform and hashtag it AXOCon. I wonder if, Caroline, if you have a minute, can you type AXOCon hashtag in the chat? And we're going to pick our winners, our favorites, after the conference, and we'll have some fun prizes. So we just want to try to create a little community here while we're all watching separately but together. And finally, thank you for all your support in attending this conference this year. This was a real uncharted territory for us to do this virtually. We felt it was really important to make this conference accessible, no barriers to participation, open to everyone. So we made it the pay what you can model, and many of you are here complimentary as a complimentary ticket, which we love and are so happy. And many of you made a contribution when you registered, which we also were really grateful for. So we just wanted you to be here. It was really important to us. But of course, as a nonprofit, we do rely on earned revenue and donations to keep going, to do what we do. And we want to do what we can to support you and do more of this kind of programming over the coming years. So if you haven't had an opportunity to donate yet, and you would like to, and you feel so inclined, any size donation is we're so grateful for, and we appreciate so much. You can text the word AXO, ACSO, to the number 44321. You can go to our website and click on the donate button. Our website is axo.org, or if you're in FeedLoop after the session, you can click on the support AXO icon in the menu. And thank you so much. And speaking of support, I want to thank our session sponsors, Alice Sorrow, who is the Executive Director of the Sacramento Philharmonic and Opera, and John Weinglass, an Emmy Award-winning composer, and both on the AXO board, are sponsoring our session today, and we really appreciate that. So now I'm going to introduce our speaker. His name is Stephen A. Adelman. He is the head of Adelman Law Group in Scottsdale, Arizona. He is the vice president of the Event Safety Alliance, and his law practice focuses on risk management, safety, and security at sports and entertainment events, and he serves as an expert witness in lawsuits arising from live events. He is also a professor at Arizona State University's Sports Law and Business program. I'm a proud alumni of Arizona State University, so I'm extra glad he's here. And he is the lead author of the Event Safety Alliance Reopening Guide. And I hope if you're not familiar with that, you'll get familiar. We have linked it in FeedLoop, and we can certainly make sure it's linked here as in Zoom as well. We're going to talk about it today. Steve writes the Adelman on Venues newsletter, and he frequently appears on national and local media. He's pretty busy these days, I think. And his dream is to have a reasonable conversation with a blue man. So if you want to know more about that, maybe we'll wait till the question and answer to figure that one out. So Steve is going to start the session by talking for about 10 or 15 minutes about the Event Safety Alliance, the reopening guide, and kind of contextualizing where we find ourselves as event producers right now. And then he and I are going to chat for about 30 minutes and talk about some of the big issues around resuming live events. And all the things to think about, all the unknowns, what has to happen, how people feel about it. And then we're going to open it up to you for the rest of the 20 minutes to ask questions about anything related to events and safety, and we will try to get them answered. So I will now turn it over to Steve, and he is going to talk to you for about 15 minutes. Steve, take it away.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you to our session sponsors. Always important to thank the people who are paying for this. I'm probably not going to talk for 15 minutes because I want to get to the conversation with Sarah and really the conversation with all of you. So as you hear things in this session, just, if you have a question or want to make a comment or something, just type it into the chat function because that'll be monitored even while, I'm ranting or while Sarah and I are chatting. Because we want to get to your stuff also. The whole point of this is not to hear ourselves speak, but rather to interact with you guys. So with that, let's use the magic of modern technology. I will show you a few pretty pictures. Let's see if this will work. There we go. So that is a pretty picture, I think, because I'm located in Scottsdale, Arizona, and that's what it looked like a couple of months ago. I like to hike, and well, it seems so tranquil in that picture that I keep using it because it reminds me of, well, when I could be outdoors, because here in Scottsdale, it is roughly 1,000 degrees. And well, it's horrible. But of course, it's horrible outside anyway, because there are lots of dumb people and there's a pandemic going on. You may have heard. Not everyone here seems to have heard, judging from their behavior. And that's what I'm going to talk about. So, let's advance the slide someplace around here. There we go. So I am one of the authors, well, really the principal author of the Event Safety Alliance Reopening Guide. And Sarah and I are going to chat about that. If you don't have a copy of the Event Safety Alliance Reopening Guide, parenthetically, the hell's wrong with you? What are you waiting for? It's free. It's available at this URL right here, eventsafetyalliance.org. You can download your own copy. Doesn't cost anything. And we want you to have it. We want you to have it and share it with people. We have made it quite accessible because we have it in multiple languages. Prefer French? Yeah, we got that. Have Chinese. We have Korean, Spanish, working on German. We have a Russian version. I think that's neat. Can't read most of these myself, but I still think they look cool, and that's why I'm showing you the cover. So this is granular operational guidance. Really what we figured out pretty early, probably sooner than a lot of people, is our elected officials, our leaders, weren't going to do a whole lot of leading. and they don't know our industry anyway. So it's not like they were going to tell you, how to, I don't know, push road cases or unload trucks and, deal with musicians and what is an orchestra pit, much less can you seat people in one. So we knew they wouldn't know. Legislative people don't know that sort of stuff, but we do because we're the Event Safety Alliance. We are those people. So we wrote 29 pages of really detailed, granular guidance. And embedded in that was the idea that it would be possible to reopen and that we would get to reopen events and venues even before there was a vaccine. We were optimists. We included a section about patron education, how to change expectations. We were really thinking this was going to work because we knew that if we provided enough detailed guidance for operations professionals, you, us, that we would follow it because we had the strongest possible incentive to do the right thing. We could reopen.
Steve,
Yeah.
Can I jump in? It
Please.
looks like your screen isn't showing. Can you unshare and then reshare your slides?
Sure.
This has worked before, so I think it'll work again.
Okay, I just stopped sharing. Can you see me?
Yes.
Cool.
And now reshare and let's see if it works.
Yeah. By the way, are you enjoying the little bobblehead? That's me. That's to make sure that you're paying attention. How about now?
I think it's working. Let me ask the crowd here. Yep, it's working. Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt. Okay. Please proceed.
No, I'm glad you did. Here, I'll go back. Hang on, just so you know what you missed. Try to be a good entertainer. So that's my opening slide. Nice Arizona scene, the Event Safety Alliance reopening guide in French or in Chinese, and we're back. So what I was talking about was our optimism that we knew that if we provided enough guidance to us, to our industry, we would follow it. We would follow it when we had the opportunity to do so because by doing the right thing, we'd get to go back to work. Because we all know, I don't have to tell you this, we were the first people to get shut down. Live events were closed before anyone else. And unfortunately, you can see the ellipsis coming. We're going to be the last to reopen because it's really hard to reopen live event spaces. And so we knew that patron education would be really important. And so early on in the Event Safety Alliance reopening guide, we wrote some guidance about that, how to change expectations. And we noted the last previous example when guests needed to be taught that something that was new wasn't necessarily something that was bad. And that was after 9/11 when suddenly there were magnetometers and security guards asking, can I open your bag, sir? Or may I check your purse, ma'am? And that was new, and there was initially some resistance, and then it went away, and then it turned completely to, hey, where's the security guy? Hey, how come there's no mags here? Hey, I don't like the way that guy looks. Somebody should wand him. But we got used to security measures post 9/11. So back in late April, early May, as we were drafting our reopening guide, we were optimistic that if people took this pandemic seriously and the need to educate patrons seriously, that we would actually get to the point where we could start to reopen. And that was what we wrote, and we released our reopening guide on May 11, 2020, which I have to say the year because time has lost all meaning. And I feel like we've been in this for eons. I feel like Rip Van Winkle, or perhaps a bear hibernating in the winter, and I'm waiting to uncurl from the fetal position. But I remember back in May, not that long ago, thinking we could teach people to social distance, wear face coverings, and wash their hands. We could teach people to do that. And then we could go back to work even before there was a vaccine, because we didn't know when that was coming. The thing that we had control over was us and our patrons. So that's what we wrote, and well, this is what happened instead. Our best hopes for humanity, yeah, they turned to crap. So this is Scottsdale, Arizona. I told you already, that's where I am. This is a few miles south of me. This is Old Town Scottsdale over Memorial Day weekend. And yeah, this happened. And this happened over and over again in lots of places, not just here in Arizona, in California too. But you, frankly, did a lot better because, well, your governor's not this guy. This guy, we'll call him Doug Ducey because that's his name. And Doug, seems to take some solace in the fact that Arizona is not alone. But he didn't finish the thought. Arizona is not alone in being stupid, in being willfully ignorant. And that is something that we didn't anticipate in the Event Safety Alliance reopening guide. We didn't anticipate that there would be so many people, including people in real positions of authority, who had access to all of the current good science and especially epidemiological information. We didn't anticipate the willful ignorance. And so, as I sit here in Scottsdale, I take no comfort in the headline behind Governor Ducey that Arizona is not alone. And frankly, as you read this, you shouldn't either, because look who's right below Arizona. I don't think that's in any particular order. It's not in alphabetical order, although you might think so until you get near the bottom. That or somebody can't spell either Texas or South Carolina. So really this whole graphic just mystifies me. But in any event, this is what happened and you know. So I'm not an optimist anymore. I'm certainly not as optimistic as I was before. And well, most recently, I wrote an article for NFPA Journal. NFPA is the National Fire Protection Association. So they're the fire marshals and other people whose job it is to keep us and our guests safe when they go into a public accommodation. And I like NFPA. I think they do a good job and they write a fine publication. So I wrote the cover story this month, and well, I'm a lot more sanguine than I was when I was the principal author of the Event Safety Alliance Reopening Guide back 500 years ago on May 11, because now I understand that governors are making really bad choices, and my neighbors and probably many of yours are willfully ignorant, and that has kept us from going back to work. And for many of us, probably will keep us from going back to work until there's a vaccine. And while I wish that I could be all happy and optimistic about the prospects for a vaccine, number one, I don't know when it's coming, none of us do. But number two, why won't that be politicized? We already know there are anti-vaxxers. What makes anyone think that there won't be some critical mass of people who say, oh, this vaccine is intended to make us, I don't know, have sex with demons or some crazy notion like that? And so while I like the optimism that I'm reading in the news like today, that there's some company in, I think, Maryland that is having good results from an early test trial on a vaccine, I am deeply concerned about the channels of distribution. I'm deeply concerned about how many people are going to decline to be vaccinated, and therefore this COVID-19 is going to linger. And damn, I hate saying that, but I think that's part of our reality. The willful ignorance isn't going to end when some physician says, here it is, I have the golden ticket, I have the vaccine. Because we already know that there's a lot of people not listening to science right now, and that's really problematic. So there's an arc to this rant before I turn it back to Sarah, and she takes our tear-laden faces off of the table. So the arc of this is we started out, the Event Safety Alliance, we started out optimistic at a high note. Then we saw stupid people doing stupid things. And so the arc trends downward as it turns out reopening is not working and we have to reclose. And so I don't want to leave you there at the trough. So I'm going to quote my favorite movie about self-reliance. It's The Martian with Matt Damon. Good movie, by the way. If you're looking for something to make you feel like the end of the world isn't quite upon us, check out The Martian. It's good entertainment. Anyway, he's got a line at the end, which I don't have to repeat because you can read it, and I can't do a good Matt Damon imitation anyway. But the whole idea is, when you're in a bad place, which we are, no sugarcoating that, no point doing that. That's just silly. We're in a bad place. A lot of it is self-inflicted. Some of it is natural and organic because we are in a pandemic and that's real. And if you don't believe that, I don't know why you're on this webinar. So we're in a bad place, but we are not helpless. The number of things that we can do is greater than 0. So it's incumbent on us to find it. And so the line from the Matt Damon character, Mark Watney, who is left for dead on Mars by himself and survives, really good premise, is you just keep working problems. You work them one at a time. And when you work one problem and solve it, you work on the next one. And if you keep solving problems, eventually you get to come home. And that's really where we are. You know, we're not going to solve this pandemic, but we can solve our own problems. We can at least work our own problems. And that's what the rest of this talk that Sarah and I are going to do is going to be about. You know, we can complain a lot. God knows everybody has stuff to complain about, but that's not really fun. So we're going to talk about the non-zero things that we can do because we are going to start solving some problems because we do want to come home. So there's your Mark Watney quote. Here's my contact info, which I'm sure will be, you know, someplace in the chat function or, you know, it's on the video anyway. So that's me. And there's the Event Safety Alliance URL again, if you want to download your free copy of the reopening guide. Now I'm going to take my screen down so that we can all look at Sarah's face and not mine. Oh, well, there's me anyway.
Can everyone see both of us? I hope you can see both of us. Thank you, Steve. And actually, after we talked, I think the last time I did actually go back and watch The Martian, and it's such a good movie. And I get so sad when his potatoes die. It's the worst moment. It was when the potatoes like get ruined. All right. Well,
by the way, if you don't know what we're talking about,
spoiler. Sorry.
Small spoiler. He gets
Spoiler.
Past it because he keeps working problems.
Well, yeah, and yeah, it's that quote tells you what happens in the end. So anyway,
he lives.
He lives. All right. Well, let's talk about some of the problems and see if we can either better unpack them a little, or you know, figure out some options. We talked about kind of where your mindset was in May when this guide came out, and then we, you know, the next 3 months happened. And you wrote this great manual that was full of it. If you guys have not read through, it's not overly long, and it's very practical and very, very well constructed. And you wrote it specifically for this kind of intermediary phase, right? So we can't come back to big, massive stadiums and venues and concert halls in the case of our members, but you know, what can you do in the meantime? What are the things we can do in the meantime? And I don't, you know, we can talk about whether we're there or whether we'll soonish be there to what we can do. But you had some ideas. You've talked about some things you've seen that give you hope and that are more than zero, that orchestras might be able to do. And some, in fact, are or are thinking about it. I know some of our members are, that are kind of an in-between option. Do you want to talk a little bit about some in-between options? We're not quite there yet, but maybe soon we'll get to an in-between option, right?
Yeah, so you all have heard the expression, the new normal. I don't think any of us should accept that. We're in a new abnormal, and it's gonna end. And you know, our options until there is genuinely something normal again, you know, when there is a vaccine which is widespread and actually has brought down the danger and risk of going out in public. But we're going to be in this interim period for a while. How long? I don't know. I'm a lawyer, not a scientist. So the things that I've seen that seem to work, I went to a drive-in EDM festival at the end of May. It was that evening 111 degrees, and then we had a dust storm. So just start right there. Consider the commitment to live entertainment that it takes to first go out when it's 111 degrees and there was a dust storm forecast. You know, be glad you don't live in Arizona right now. And people stayed. Incidentally, they didn't stay in their cars because it was an EDM festival. It lasted for like 4 hours. And so people were outside. That told me several important things. One, people want to go to events. They don't want to be stuck indoors. That's really good news for all of us, because there is, we can talk about the other side of this coin in a minute, but there is an almost unlimited desire to be entertained, to interact with other humans, even if only from a distance. And you can take advantage of that if you have some outdoor space that's available to you, whether it's a parking lot or a field. You know, you can borrow some neighbor property. I mean, God's natural HVAC works well for this pandemic, because one of the problems with COVID-19 is lack of air circulation. When we aerosolize our droplets, if they don't move, then they simply stay where they are. And then 6 feet of social distance becomes problematic. But if those aerosolized droplets are moving, then you are okay, and you have relatively mitigated the risk of being within 6 feet of other people because the air is moving. It's just like if you hike like I do, I don't wear a face covering when, well, I don't hike now because it's 1,000 degrees. But when I was hiking, I didn't wear a face covering because the time that I was right next to somebody was like that. Because I was moving in one direction, they were moving the other direction. We were never close to each other. I do the same thing now when I ride my bike at 5 in the morning. So outdoor spaces are natural candidates for any kind of event, including symphonic music. Let's leave for a moment how you get a symphony seated, but maybe you have, I don't know, a string quartet. Maybe you put on chamber music. Maybe, you know, if you have access to an entire symphony's worth of musicians, you bring them in for different events and have them work together. I don't know, I'm not a classical musician, but you figure it out. But the point is, back to Matt Damon's Mark Watney character, you work the problem. And you know that some things are gonna go wrong. They will, they definitely will. But you can keep working your problem. So anyway, so I went to an outdoor, sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, so in California, we're not there yet. We can't gather in groups yet. But I know quite a number of our members, our orchestras, are starting to think, you know, we don't know, this fall, maybe there's some outdoor opportunities. And actually, we've seen an example, and if there are others, you guys can write in the chat if I'm not aware. One of our members, the Mainly Mozart Festival in the San Diego area, has been doing, I think in an old horse race arena, a big dirt field, they've been doing drive-in, you know, small ensemble performances, so that the drive-in nature of it, I think, doesn't violate the sort of no gatherings of people, because that presumably everyone's sitting in their cars. So we're not at a gathering place in like parks where we can get out and sit in the circles or whatever that they did in San Francisco. But you're saying, and our members are thinking this way, many of them, that outdoor performance is possibly the next phase, with small ensembles, small groups of musicians, soloists, that kind of thing.
Yes. Now, let's be sure, since I have learned my lesson about wild-eyed optimism back from May, let's be sure that we're clear about what has to happen, because
Yes.
Governor Newsom is going to lift the number of people who can get together sooner or later. That doesn't mean that you suddenly turn into the chain smokers, on Eastern Long Island, and you invite people to do the right thing, but then when they start to do the wrong thing, you say, oh, well, I can't do anything about it, so I guess lots of people are gonna get, coronavirus. If you do that, you will ruin it for everyone else and yourself. So I'm really, really angry about that. And you should be too, because every time somebody does an event, the microscope is on them. The spotlight shines brightly. And every time we have an opportunity to succeed, it is also an opportunity to fail and set everyone back. And so you can be a role model, or you can wind up in my next slide deck as somebody who messed up an opportunity and ruined it for a lot of other people also. And the chain smokers will have to deal with that, as will the city manager in whatever town this was, because they had a fine idea. There was nothing wrong with doing a drive-up EDM festival. I went to one that worked. There's nothing wrong with the concept. But now, they're not going to get to do another one, not for a long time, because they screwed it up. So, I'm all for where we are right now, having this conversation even before you can actually put on any events, because now is the time to ask yourself, when you're done with this session, to look in the mirror and say, I really want to get reopened. I really want to get back to work. Can I? I'm prepared to do what's necessary so that I'm not the poster child for the next dumbass move. Because if you're not able to answer that question, if you're not able to say, I not only have a good plan, but I'm prepared to enforce it. I have people who are ready to take on the ones who will be non-compliant. I am ready to enforce my rules. If you're not able to say that, then you're not ready. So you get to think about that now.
So let me ask you, because you talked about having your plan, what's your plan for hosting a live event, maybe on a very small scale, maybe outdoors. You have your plan, but your plan also has to comply with who else's plans, venues, your county public health, state public health. Who are the other entities that you have to look to comply with and that they sign off on your plan when this time comes?
So Sarah, that's a really good question. So now let's finish with the ranting. I'm talking to myself right now. I'm going to finish with the ranting. Let's get more into the operational details. So I am aware that few of you watching this control your own venue. So the first entity that you have to deal with is whoever actually has operational control over the venue, the venue's rules, and the venue's enforcement of their rules. You're not bringing your own security. You're probably not writing your own, your own health and safety plan either. You may have one for your own musicians, but chances are pretty good that you're not going to create the plans or the implementation of those plans for front of house. You may not even control it for back of house. So the first entity that you have to get on the same page with is whoever has authority for the house that you would use. Again, things are easier when the house is not actually a brick and mortar venue, but rather, a green field or a parking lot, because there are just fewer operational roadblocks. But first is whoever is making the venue's operational decisions, period. Next, we get into the concept of an authority having jurisdiction. That is a term. Remember my friends from NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association? Authority having jurisdiction is an official term. It's the AHJ. And the AHJ can be the local fire marshal. In this case, during the pandemic, it probably also includes whoever is your local head of public health, police, fire, EMS. They're all authorities having jurisdiction over their own specific areas. Even before the pandemic, ideally, you, on behalf of the talent and the event, plus the venue, plus whatever vendors are working with the venue to implement the venue's plans, they should all be working in cooperation with the authorities having jurisdiction, the AHJs. There should be a team that all is roughly communicating with each other. Doesn't mean everybody has to be at your event. They probably won't be. You know, civil servants have other jobs to do, but you at least want to get their input. You want to get their sign off. Really, you want to get their input because you want to do as well as you can using the information they have that you might not. Getting their sign off is a bonus, and you might use that for CYA if you need it. Parenthetically, you won't. But yeah, you want to coordinate with all the people who are in the line of authority that you have to deal with. Because you having a plan doesn't get that plan implemented. You probably don't have enough authority.
Sorry,
There we go.
it took me a minute to unmute that. Oh, and I'm getting feedback. So we have a number of orchestras of all sizes who are thinking about, you know, some future casting into what they hope is the fall, maybe even into early next year, about trying to get live performance up and going in a scaled down, reasonable, safe way. But of course, in California, we have, you know, and pretty much the entire state is under pretty rigid sort of restrictions. As we start to formulate plans of how we can do this safely, what jurisdictions, what authorities we need to be on the same page as, are there ways or elements of our plan that we need to make sure are in place to be able to sort of convince or to assure all those authorities that we've got it covered? So maybe this is more nuts and bolts, but you know, there's some case making to be made, right? So if an orchestra says, I want to try to put a chamber concert on in a park, socially distanced, and you know, a few musicians, right now that's not a go, but I think that there's a desire to say, but it could be a go. Like, why should that kind of a performance have to wait until phase 4 or whenever, you know, Live Nation is allowed to come back? Couldn't we do something small now? Or soon. How do you case make that? How do you explain to maybe a public health official or an elected official who doesn't understand that orchestras can scale down significantly and do something for the public? How do you, I guess my question is, how do you case make that? What do you have to have in place? This is the plan, this is an approval, but what do you need to, you know, make sure you're telling them?
There are only 3 things that people need to do all the time, without exception. Let's go through them together. The 3 things, there are only 3 here. 3. I'm holding up 3 fingers. There are only 3 things that everyone needs to do all the time during this pandemic, during this current abnormal. 1, 6 feet of social distancing. Now, we'll get to on-stage performances, not this moment, but right now, 6 feet of social distancing, 2 meters if you prefer the metric system. That's not negotiable. 6 feet, front of house for patrons, back of house for workers, on stage at least 6 feet because they're going to aerosolize further. Social distancing, number 1, okay? How many are there? 3. 2. What's the second thing? Face coverings. Who can avoid wearing face coverings? Let's see. If you're eating, if you're drinking, you can use a straw with your face covering on. I've done it. So if you're eating or if you are performing vocally, There, have I concluded the list? Yes, I have. Yes, that is not an including but not limited to type of lawyer provision. That's a list right there, done. There's a period at the end of it. People who are eating and people who are vocalizing. That's it. Other than that, everybody has to wear a face covering all the time. There are no exceptions because the coronavirus doesn't give a crap what you're doing. They don't care if you're more comfortable unloading road cases, not breathing through a face covering. It doesn't matter. If you don't want somebody to get sick, they have to have face coverings. So how many requirements did I count? 3. Oh yes, 3. So 1 was social distance. 2, face coverings. 3, what's 3? Oh, I'm looking at my hand. Yes, I am. Oh yes, wash your hands. Hand washing is better than sanitizing. So hand washing stations are preferable to hand sanitizer, but I would be a hypocrite if I didn't have not 1, but 2 things of hand sanitizer right behind me. Not staging, that's actually where they live because I use hand sanitizer even in my office. Yeah, I promised you 3 things. Are there more, Steve? How many more things? Is this one of those lawyer traps, which is an including but not limited to? No, it's just 3. It's not hard. So Sarah, you asked what's the case making? The case making is, dear authority having jurisdiction. We know what's required of everybody. It's only 3 things. We can count to 3, and we are prepared to enforce 1, social distancing, 2, face covering, 3, hand washing. We are prepared to enforce those. We know what the rules are, and we are ready to make it happen. That's the case.
Well, let's talk a little bit about enforcement because, we are seeing here and there policies being put forward preliminarily. So for example, in Los Angeles, there has the County Department of Public Health has put forth protocols for studio musicians to get back to performing. And the protocols are very detailed, but one of the biggest things that has to be in place is a compliance person, somebody who's there to monitor the situation and to make sure those 3 things are happening at all times. Is this going to be the new normal for anybody who's producing an event, is to have a compliance person on site to watch like a hawk, all of the steps and safety and to ask and to enforce sort of audience compliance if there are some challenges there?
It's kind of embarrassing that we have to talk about chaperoning adults to make sure that they don't do stupid things that could kill them. It's kind of amazing, isn't it, that we value the lives of other people around us so little, and we value our own, liberty or selfish pleasures that much. So I don't know the answer. I genuinely don't. I suspect that, Derek Jeter, who is one of the owners of the Miami Marlins, presiding over a baseball team that cannot play because so many of their players had to go out and violate their quarantine. So instead of earning their living, they're just taking 14 days in hotel rooms. You wouldn't think that would be necessary. Clearly, some people need it. I don't know that that's going to be a requirement because I don't think there are the resources for that. How many stern chaperones are there going to be? That's not a thing anyone's trained to do. It does, however, raise an important issue, though, which is if you think, after looking at yourself in the mirror, if you think that you're ready to reopen whenever Governor Newsom says you're allowed to, if you think that you're ready, who do you have in mind who's going to approach the first selfish, dumb person who insists on their right to not wear a face covering? Who's going to do that? And if you don't know who that person is by name, and if you're not familiar with what training they've had, whether it's verbal judo or actual judo, or they're carrying some kind of weapon, hopefully metaphorical and not physical, if you don't know who that is, then you're still not ready. because whether it's a chaperone presiding over artists or security watching the audience like a hawk, making sure that they do the only three things that they need to, clearly we need to be babysat. And I am appalled to have to say that, but it is obviously true.
Sorry, I keep hearing some feedback. You've written about and talked a little bit about liability issues. So if as you've talked about, events go forward, even small events, even, with these three elements, in place, and who your enforcement folks are, and something happens, the worst happens, something unfortunate happens. What are the liability issues that orchestras and other performing arts organizations are going to need to think about in terms of protecting themselves, getting waivers signed? What kind of world are we walking into there?
Well, I'm happy to say this is a good story. So I always preface this the same way. If, as you're watching this webinar right now, or if you're watching a recorded version, if you're the kind of person who wants to take a note or two when a lawyer is telling you legal things that you can use and not charging you and not blaming you for anything, you're the kind of person to take a note in that situation, get ready, here goes, I'm going to teach you some law, 3, 2, 1, now. What we're talking about here is legal liability. It's the law of negligence. That is a tort, T-O-R-T. So we're talking about tort law right now. There are 4 elements that a plaintiff has to prove in order to establish that a tort has been committed against them. 4 elements. Remember that before there were 3, now there are 4. There are 4 elements to a tort. Here they are. Ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Duty, breach, causation, and harm or damages. So duty, breach, causation, harm, those are the 4 elements of a tort. It is the plaintiff's burden of proving all 4 of those by what's called a preponderance of the evidence. Reduced to math, that means 51%, more likely than not. So why is this a good story for you? Well, let's imagine some person who comes to an event and they contract COVID-19. Let's make it a happy story. They are asymptomatic and they recover and don't infect anybody else. But they're pissed, they've suffered emotional distress, and they lawyer up and want to sue. Should you be concerned? Should you be worried about your legal liability in that scenario? No. Here's why. So remember the 4 elements of a tort: duty, breach, causation, harm. Let me explain what those mean to you in English. Duty. There is a duty of care, the duty that everyone has to behave as a reasonable person under the same or similar circumstances. There, I said it slowly because that's actual law, not only in California, but everywhere where the law is common law, which is, the US, Canada, about half the countries on the planet. So everyone has a legal duty to behave as a reasonable person under the same or similar circumstances. Applying that to the current circumstances, if you reopen, you have a duty to provide premises which are reasonably healthy and safe for this new abnormal during a pandemic before there's a vaccine. There. Is there a duty of care? Yes, there is. I just told you what it is. Every plaintiff would know that. It's not hard. Breach. Plaintiff would have to prove that you breached that duty. Well, let's just set that one aside. We'll come back to it in a minute. Let's get to the 3rd element, because here's the happy place. The 3rd element is causation, or what lawyers refer to as proximate cause. Now remember, we have somebody in this hypothetical who came to your event, got sick, and now they're pissed after they've recovered. Well, in that scenario, they have been able to go other places, not just your venue, not just your event. They were able to go to Vaughn's. They I don't know, walked around. They maybe went to the beach or, went for a hike or did something else. They hung out over the back fence with the neighbors. They did stuff, because by the time you're allowed to open, other things will be reopened also. Why does that matter in this story? Because proximate cause will be almost impossible to establish for anyone who went to your event who also went other places during the same 2-week incubation period for COVID-19. They won't be able to establish proximate cause by a preponderance of the evidence, 51%, because they will have been to so many other places. So you will always win that scenario, period. I promised we would come back to the element of breach. Remember, duty, breach, causation, harm. We talked about the first element. There is a duty. I already told you what it is. Talked about the third element, proximate cause. You'll win that. That's how you get out of this. Breach? No, you're not going to breach your duty of care. Why? Because you're going to download your free copy of the Event Safety Alliance reopening guide. And you're going to look in the mirror before you reopen. And you're going to say, do I have a plan for at least my people? And you're going to say, yes, I do. And then you're going to ask, wait, I don't control this venue. Does the venue have a plan? And you're going to ask them. And if they don't have a good answer, you're not going to reopen there. But if they have a good answer, great. Then you're going to talk to all the authorities having jurisdiction because you know that that's important. And then after you get all these good plans and maybe even a confirming email or two that'll really make you feel confident, then you get to the hard part. That's not the hard part. The hard part is who's going to enforce all this. And if you don't have a good answer to that, you're going to say, God damn it, I was so close, but no, I can't reopen yet because I don't have people who are ready to enforce this. I'm not going to be the next chain smoker's story. When you have all of that buttoned up, then you'll be in a good place as far as the law is concerned. So let me finish this thought. It'll just take another minute. Waivers of liability. There are lots of people talking about waivers of liability now, especially after the Trump rally in Tulsa, where the actual waiver language was online, and many of you probably have seen it. It's good language, that waiver language from the Trump rally in Tulsa. It's good language. Some smart lawyer wrote it. When I say it's good language, I mean it's written clearly. It does what it's supposed to do. Alas, waivers of liability don't do very much. If you think that that's going to help you, think again. I will tell you why. Ready? Right now. 3, 2, 1. Here goes. Waivers of liability are basically like warning signs. They're signs that you would, hang from a fence in the parking lot before people walk into your event space. They apprise people what the risk is that they are choosing to take. Does it prevent someone who gets sick from suing, our hypothetical, asymptomatic carrier who then recovers? Does it prevent that person from suing? No, even if they sign a waiver, even if they're one of the 6,200 people in Tulsa who click yes and then put on their MAGA hat, does that prevent them from suing? No, it does not. Does it prevent them from winning? No, it does not. Because everyone who puts on an event during a pandemic still has a legal duty to behave reasonably under the circumstances of a global pandemic with not enough testing, no contact tracing, and a vaccine on the distant horizon somewhere. But you still have that legal duty. You can't disclaim that. Waivers of liability are disfavored as a matter of law. So, to put a bow around this legal discussion, there are 4 elements to a tort. You will almost certainly win any negligence claim, any claim that you got somebody sick or participated in an event which got somebody sick. You will almost certainly win that because the victim who's pissed and wants someone to pay them will not be able to establish the element of proximate cause. Also, because you have listened to me rant and scream my lungs out, you will do the things necessary to not breach your duty of care. And the last thing is waivers of liability, they're notice of the risk that you cannot completely eliminate. So it's the risk that someone chooses to accept when they come to your event. That's what a waiver of liability does. It's not some cure-all any more than a vaccine is. It helps, but not a whole lot. And I don't know, my thought has been that I'm not trying to give patrons another reason to stay away. So really, I think the better course of action is not legal advice. This is just kind of operational wisdom. I think your better course of action is to, when somebody, registers for a ticket, whenever that's allowed to happen again, have a link on your website to the CDC website so that they can get some actual information about the risks that they're accepting, and maybe even understand why face coverings are important. Maybe link to the World Health Organization. Johns Hopkins University's medical school has a really robust website. There are a lot of resources, so choose whatever one you like best. I don't know, UCLA or USC or somebody like that. But that's all it is, it's notice. So should you be afraid of the law in this situation? No, you shouldn't. You should be afraid of reopening before you're ready to keep it healthy and safe. That's what you should be thinking about.
As you were talking, I was thinking about, orchestras certainly might, face the issue of having to convince audience to comply with the rules in order to come back. But I also think orchestras are going to have to think about, and you talk about this in the guide quite a bit, there's an extensive section, and you mentioned it at the beginning, orchestras do have a contingency of folks who come, patrons, subscribers, who are older and might be in these at-risk populations. So orchestras are also going to have a burden of, again, case making or assuring their older patrons that not only are they in compliance, but they've maybe gone over and above compliance to be as safe as possible to assure and comfort their older patrons that they can come back. So there's almost a dual messaging that has to happen. On one hand, you have to comply or you can't, come to our event, and the other, we want you to come to our event, look at all of the things we've done to make it safe. You really have to be prepared. And this goes back to that patron education process. There's a lot of education and messaging that you have to do in almost multiple, different statements that have to be made depending on who your audience is. But it's a lot of, I think there's, I think that section is particularly valuable because it basically it comes down to message and message and message again.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to take some coaxing, especially as people get more and more used to watching things on their video. It's going to take more coaxing to get them out. And you're right. I mean, your cohort, your natural audience, they're older, their immunity systems are somewhat more compromised. If they're smart, open question, I've learned to not take that for granted, but if they are careful about their own health, they are going to require more reassurance that you're being careful with their health. Right. But you should be. I mean, that is part of behaving reasonably under your circumstances. In that case, your circumstances include understanding who your audience is. They're not, robust guys like me. They're, people like my 86-year-old aunt who loves symphonic music. And I don't know that she's ever going to come out to a live performance again, but she'll pay good money to watch a video from her own home. She does.
Well, hopefully the audiences are both you robust guys like you and your 86-year-old aunt. That's, I think, what orchestras hope is there's a nice mix, but there certainly are folks who are in those more, concerned or vulnerable groups. Well, we've had some questions piling up as I've been watching, and I think it's time to turn over those questions. And I am ready, so I'm just gonna scan through a little bit. We had a couple questions about broadcasting and streaming, and I would say that we're talking about sort of live events in this session. We do have a session on broadcasting coming up in this conference, so we're probably going to table those streaming questions because this is really about live events and where we are and when we can return. Someone did ask the $1 million question about dealing with wind players. folks who project the aerosol. And I know we've seen some examples. There's studies being done in Europe about how far, aerosol projection goes. And I know 12 feet seems to be the standard with those folks, and plexiglass seems to be what's starting to be utilized. Can you comment any more on wind players?
I know the same thing that you just said.
Okay.
Honestly, plexiglass seems like the best solution. And I've seen that used in so many other environments, including my local Home Depot and supermarket, that it seems like that's going to be an easy fix. I always revert back to Mark Watney: solve one problem and move on to the next one. Plexiglass is an easy solution. You can manage that, in your own shop. Do that and move on to the next problem.
Okay, so you're saying we've solved the wind problem. Plexiglass is a good.
Solved is probably overstating
distance.
it.
Right.
But you've mitigated the risk in a reasonable fashion. And again, that's the legal duty of care. It also is the kind thing to do for people.
Yeah. We have another question. This is a good one about what to do with folks who cite the Americans with Disability Act to avoid wearing a face mask for medical reasons. What's the way to handle that situation? Or your thoughts anyway on that situation?
Yeah, with a couple of minor exceptions that I hope you'll excuse, we've stayed out of politics, and
we've tried. Yes.
Yeah, we've tried, and I have done far worse on webinars than I have here today. So please understand that I am perfectly willing to call out people who are making what I think are nonsense arguments. So let's just call this one by its right name, and then I'll give you the solution. There is a very small ADA issue about the use of face covering. And really, it's about people who have to read lips in order to communicate. And for them, having the person with whom they're trying to communicate wear a face shield is a perfectly good solution, consistent with face covering. So there, I have actually addressed the legitimate Americans with Disabilities Act issue with regard to the three things that everyone's required to do. As for people who have that poorly printed card that they got off of the internet, let's just say that's not a thing, and do your research if you think that it is, because it's not. Did I say it's not a thing? It's not. And the useful advice is, I have a friend, my friend Nanette. She's here in Phoenix, but she's really good, and she travels. Travel is metaphorical now. She's available online. My friend Nanette is an expert in the Americans with Disabilities Act, and she works for several of our local sports teams. And she has a private practice as well. When I have an ADA question, I call Nanette, and she's smart. She's also fun. And she tells me when something is nonsense or not. And so, when people were saying, I have a comfort gerbil, Nanette was laughing, and she would say, no, because that's not a thing under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So whether it's Nanette, Odell is her last name, whether it's Nanette Odell here in Phoenix or somebody local to you, if you anticipate that that's going to be a problem, somebody coming up with one of these nonsensical ADA claims, make friends with your local ADA advocate. Just look it up online. There will be someone, because ADA advocates are a thing, and they don't want the Americans with Disabilities Act used for nonsensical political reasons. For them, this is really important. It's a cause. And they're going to be with you in having people with legitimate health and safety concerns be able to address them, and people with non-legitimate political concerns pounding sand and not using their statute for nefarious purposes. So get your version of Nanette.
Okay. We had a comment from someone who's not only works for one of our members, our member organizations, music organizations, but she says she's an elected official in California. And she said that the governor's mandates and local health departments here have a lot of additional legal mandates and enforceable fines and, loss of business licensing and insurance if there's non-compliance with the current policies. So I think her point was it can be a lot more complicated, or there's a lot more to think about than the three things in terms of businesses being compliant.
Well, that's right. So let's do this in the right order. Things that you must do. You must comply with the law. There, everybody understand that? Everybody has to follow the law. So you're in California, you have to follow California law. That includes both statutes and regulations. Regulations are written by legislative staff to put meat on the bones of a statute to tell you how do you do the thing that is required under the statute. That's what a regulation is for. So yes, you have to comply with those things. Most of the time, and I believe COVID-19 is consistent with this, most of the time, what is required by statute is less onerous than what is required by common law. Because again, legislative statutes set a minimum standard, a threshold. You must meet this standard, but it doesn't tell you how much higher you can go. That is the province of common law. Because common law says you have to behave reasonably, not do the minimum, but rather you have to behave reasonably under your circumstances. Well, our circumstances are pretty dangerous right now. So doing whatever Governor Newsom and his legislative team have come up with is a bare minimum. The enforcement mechanism is what it is, and hopefully they're able to enforce it in most states, certainly mine. Enforcement, what's that? We'd be getting fat on tax dollars brought in from non-compliant venue operators if enforcement was a thing. So I hope that in California it is, but that just really sets a minimum standard. The duty to behave reasonably under your circumstances is a higher standard almost all the time.
And would you advise that orchestras, and I think the person who asked this question, this is what she's saying, is really get to know your local public health department, whether that's city or county, who has the local jurisdiction, get to know who they are, get to know what those jurisdictions are, and make sure that they know you, right? They know that you're a classical music organization presenting concerts and know who you are.
I'm going to use the bobblehead to answer this question. There. Can you see he's nodding?
Yes. Great.
So yes, use your friends.
Yes.
In the Event Safety Alliance reopening guide, we wrote, "We're all in this together." And that's a line that has been widely misused, but we took it pretty literally. And I still think that's true. We are all in this together. So your local public health, public safety officials, they want you to succeed. They don't want you to be, the next version of the Chainsmokers. They don't want that. That's a black eye for them too. So use your friends, whether they're named Annette or Officer or, whoever.
Yes, I would agree. If you haven't gotten to know your elected officials, your local, your local departments and city and county kind of government, like this is the time. This is the time to know those folks. We haven't talked about yet, which is interesting because there's so much to talk about. For not all of our orchestras are union orchestras, but a good contingency of them are. And one of the other entities that orchestras will have to factor into their planning are unions, because of course there are safety guidelines written by unions or being written by unions for musicians. And I have seen the guidelines that the union operating in and around the Los Angeles area has put out. All unions, I think, will probably put together their own similar version. But that's another layer of compliance that orchestras will have to be familiar with, will have to know, will have to comply with. And again, making sure that you know your union rep and you're in communication and compliance when the time comes is going to be important. Is there anything you would want to add about union regulations and safety?
Yeah, union rules won't be regulations. That's a term reserved for the enforcement of laws. So they're union requirements that they want you to follow, and they may not send their union members if you say that you're not going to follow. If you don't say that you're not going to follow their requirements, it may be that people show up with certain expectations and then they're going to see how you do. That's a challenging situation because musicians want to work also. And I think one of the clear messages since late March is there is widely varying willingness to subject ourselves to health risks. And I suspect that willingness to subject ourselves to health risks increases the longer we've been out of work. So that shouldn't tempt you to sort of blow off union health and safety requirements, but it should just make you aware that if you're relying on the musicians to be whistleblowers, don't, because they really need to work. They're almost all independent contractors, often without health insurance. They're in a bad place. And, they don't have the kind of leverage that as individuals that people who have, employee positions might have. That's why their union is so important. So I guess this is a request. Doing the right thing is the right thing. And you're also going to have to monitor that you're doing the right thing for your unionized musicians, because many of them will be either too timid or too needy to speak up for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think the musicians who are part of unions, their unions are obviously their advocates in ensuring they can get back to work. They want them to work too. So it seems like there's this all in it together idea is everybody wants everybody to get back to work, but obviously in a safe way. We're almost out of time, so I'm going to ask this final question, and this is probably speculative more than concrete, but there's going to be a lot more responsibility on anybody who produces an event of any size, whether it be small scale, outdoor, if that's kind of our next option, or whenever we can get back to the concert hall. There are now new responsibilities and regulations and requirements that we are going to have to follow that we didn't have to 4 or 5 months ago. It's a lot to think about. It's a lot to take on. It's a lot to add to the plates of nonprofits, many of whom are already operating on thin margins, as it is, and are reliant on donations and ticket sales. How do you think we're all going to fare under this? Do you think this is all doable? Do you think this is the problem? We just plant our potatoes and solve the next problem and hope we can survive on Mars until we get home again? Do you think that there is a path forward that is doable for people presenting concerts or any kind of performance? It's a big speculative question.
Yes.
Okay. With a one-word answer.
Is there a path forward? Yes. Will our potatoes blow up and be ruined? Yes. Will we figure out another way to survive? Yes. Will it be hard? Yes. Will we have to think more creatively about our circumstances than we ever have before? Yes. Are we equipped to do that? Because, probably all of us are liberal arts majors who never have traveled a straight and narrow path in our lives. We're the people who color outside the lines. So are we relatively well equipped to maneuver, to think way outside the box because we have to right now? Yeah, we are. Would we all rather that we didn't have to think that way? Hell yes. Will we be ecstatic when there's a goddamn vaccine? Yeah. But do we know when that's coming? No. Can we afford to wait? Probably not. So should we go ahead making plans for what we can do while we can do it until there's a new time and new circumstances with a new reasonableness standard? Yeah. So my answer to your question is yes.
There's reason to be optimistic is what you're saying. You found that you're holding on to that seed of optimism. Yes, I agree. Well, thank you. Thank you for being here, Steve. Thank you for writing the Event Safety Alliance Reopening Guide. I recommend highly that everybody read it if they haven't, and I imagine there will be future editions as we continue to move forward that we can look for.
No,
maybe someday.
We had plans to update it, and then things that had already reopened started to close, and ultimately, to quote my friend Tim Roberts, who was very quick with a quip, he said, in our update, you should open the cover and it should just be one word in the middle of a big white page. Wait.
Well, there's the second edition, but thank you for the first. I highly recommend everybody read it, and thank you all for being at this session, and we'll see you all at the next one. And thank you again, Steve.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Sarah.
Bye.